25 Earth and Novus Prime. Stargate Command Briefing Room Year 2, Day 1, 0800. President Robert Mackenzie walked into the briefing room and sat down in the last available chair. The other chairs were taken by Generals O'Neill and Hank Landry, along with several IOA representatives. Mackenzie had not wanted to waste time with red tape, and he wanted people with common sense and good intentions. So he had insisted that the by now infamous F-Team represented the IOA for this meeting. Completing the group were Richard Woolsey and Radek Zelenka, who were here to represent Atlantis. It was Zelenka who would be providing the actual brief, so Mackenzie turned to him. "Doctor," Mackenzie said, "you have the floor." As you all know, 45 days ago, the last fleet of Berserker drones began attacking the Nakai. We have been using the deep space internet to monitor the Berserker war as best as we can. Until now, the Central Authority has been suffering massive losses while taking out only a handful command ships in return. However, 2 days ago, one of the command ships attacked a Jinako warship. We believe that this is because the vicegerent control of the drones is breaking down. "How do you know that?" Mackenzie asked. "We have analyzed the signals between the command ships and the drones," Zelenka said. "We found vicegerent coding hidden in the transmission, which has been, for lack of a better term, dissolving." "So, does that mean that the Jinako have entered the war?" Reginald Jones, the British representative, asked. "Yes," Woolsey said. "And as far as we can tell, the tide has turned against the Berserkers. In the past 2 days, the Jinako have destroyed 11 command ships and hundreds of drones. We have given all our information to the proper people at the Pentagon, and they are running the scenarios at the moment. The first official projections should be coming out tomorrow. But for now, it's sufficient to say that things are not looking good for the Nakai in the long term. Even if they defeat the Berserkers, there's a good chance they will be facing a war with the Jinako next, which probably won't end well for them." "What about our people?" "The Delta site is up and running. We send a crew led by Colonel Ben Pierce," Landry said. Colonel Pierce had been the commanding officer of the Alpha site for years. Pierce had also been promoted from lieutenant colonel to full bird colonel. His former post as Alpha site commander has been taken by Colonel David Dixon. Dixon had also been promoted to full bird colonel. As for the supply line, they have successfully dialed the Epsilon site. We've also begun refueling the Beta site power source. "Is that possible?" Jones asked. "We cannot refuel the hyperdrive cores that are still partially filled," Zelenka began. "To do so would destabilize them, but we can refuel the empty ones." Zelenka handed out several sheets of paper. "I thought we had plenty of dials left," Henry Valli, the French representative, said. "That was the point of this whole scheme, right?" "Yeah, about that," O'Neill began while looking at Woolsey. "Our calculations show that with Delta Epsilon arrangement, we can stretch our fuel supply to 4 connections. By partial refueling between dials, we should be able to increase that number to 8, Woolsey said. "We recommend dialing only once a month to deliver crucial supplies." "But even if we do that, our supply line would dry up after 8 months, Mackenzie began. "What about a complete refueling of the power source? Will it still take 5 years?" "The main problem is not such the refueling," Zelenka said. "There are extremely high levels of radiation inside the power source. Our process of purging this radiation takes several years. If we can streamline this process, I believe we could significantly reduce the inactive period." "Define significant, Doctor," Valli said. "Without the issue caused by the radiation, the downtime would be as little 2 months, Zelenka said. "There is a solution, but—" "You want to ask the new Assurance for help," Boris Grankin, the Russian representative, said. "That will not go over well with those higher in the chain of command." The IOA had been very unhappy when the new Assurance had arrived in the Milky Way galaxy. But new Assurance had proven not to be a threat to anybody. But if it is the only viable option, We believe it is, Zelenka said, before looking at Mackenzie. Let's cross that bridge when we get to it, Mackenzie said. For now, I'm more interested in the new assurance on Freedom Prime. How are things going at the Epsilon site? The expansion has been completed, and the Stargate has been upgraded for long-range dialing, sir, Landry said. But the most important memo is that the chaser has launched, O'Neill said. Yes, Zelenka said. The plan is for them to stay in FTL for 2 days, then they will drop out and test their Stargate. The Primians have built roofs over 3 of their cities. The remaining 14 cities have been sealed off by landing one of the Nakai colony domes on top of them. This leaves us with 68 domes. And since there are 17 cities, each will be granted 4 domes to dismantle for resources, Woolsey said. Including the generators from the domes, which will leave the planet with a considerable energy surplus, Zelenka said. Once that surplus is tied into the planet's Stargate, it will be capable of dialing the Delta site and chaser. What about Spira? Mackenzie asked. They reached Novus Prime yesterday, Woolsey said. Establishing diplomatic contact with the locals proved difficult, but today a diplomatic party will visit the ship. Mackenzie nodded. From what he had heard, things had indeed not gone smoothly yesterday. After the original contact, there had been a long discussion over the radio. This had been followed by several hours of silence, during which the Novus Senate has been locked in very heated debate. That had been followed by a very rude transmission that told the Spira to leave, or they would be fired upon. So Vale had given the order for a short FTL jump. But as Spira had been jumping, something had happened down on the planet. Word of the ship's arrival had leaked out to the public, and they had been very angry that the ship had been turned away. The Senate building had been surrounded by an angry mob, and the Senate guards had refused to do anything about it because they had agreed with the protesters. Mackenzie hoped that Vale and his people would be able to calm things down. Spira Mess Hall Year 2, Day 1, 1217. Sinara was studying a schematic of Spira. Tilda, if I'm going to living on this ship, I need to know all that I can about it. Tilda and it beat dealing with the diplomatic party from Novus Prime. The group was being given a tour by Dr. Aronov and Major Haley. It consisted of 2 politicians and 2 civilians called Jason and Ellie. While the politicians had been bickering the entire time, the civilians had been very nice. Sinara and Haley had been curious why these 2 civilians had been picked, so Haley had simply asked them. That was when they had learned that Jason and Ellie had been part of the Novus colony that had made first contact with Destiny's crew. They had also spearheaded the protests. After first contact, there had been some trouble. In the end, the people of the colony had been relocated to Novus Prime by Destiny. Haley had also researched something else. During their visit to Novus, the original One Destiny's crew had learned about Lieutenant Johansson's ALS. They had also learned that there was a massive database which contained a cure for the disease. Destiny had managed to secure a chunk of that database, but the cure hadn't been in that part. What had puzzled Haley was the fact that the Novus Prime Colonial Expedition had gotten a complete copy of the database. So why hadn't Destiny's crew gotten the cure from that copy? It turned out that the database was divided into 15 levels of classification. The copy that the Novus Prime Expedition had taken along had only contained levels 1 through 13. But some foolish politician had made the cure classification level 14. Which meant that the only copy of the database with the cure was on the sublight evacuation ships, which was the one copy nobody could get to. Tilda bloody politicians, Tilda Sinara turned her attention to the schematic. Spira was divided into 3 general sections. There was the habitual section, which was where all the facilities and quarters were. Next came the buffer zone. This was where all of Spira's spare parts were stored, and the radiation shielding was. The shielding was sponge-like and 3 meters thick. Sinara had asked why the new Assurans had not upgraded the shielding. The problem was that to remove the shielding, you had to open up the hull. Worse, if you moved it, the stuff started leaking radiation. A lot. The radiation would poison everybody within 5,000 kilometers. It would take only 0.003 seconds for anybody within range to take a lethal dose. So the new Asurans had left the shielding alone. Finally, there was the section of Spira with the engines. There were several narrow corridors that allowed access for maintenance. These corridors were not connected to the habitual section. The only way to reach them was to exit the section, walk across the hull, and then go back inside through a special airlock. Before she could study the schematic further, the diplomatic party entered the room. Much to her relief, the politicians were no longer bickering. Aronov had managed to get them to talk calmly. Tilda, if I had become empress, I would have made him an ambassador. Tilda, how Nikita had managed to keep his cool and be this patient with these people was beyond her. She was apparently not the only one who was not a fan of the politicians, because Ellie and Jason split from the group as soon as they could. "May we?" Ellie asked. "Have a seat." Ellie and Jason sat down. "So, how do you like Spira?" "It's a lot smaller than Destiny," Jason said. "But it's got all the essential parts and it's cozy, and the bridge was really impressive." "This ship has its perks," Sinara said with a smile. "So tell me all about it," Jason said. Sinara nodded, and then began telling them about how she had ended up aboard this ship. Spira Aronov's quarters, year 2, day 3, 0715. The two politicians had not been very useful, but Ellie and Jason had managed to convince the Novus Senate to open up their database and intelligence reports to Spira's crew. The intelligence reports on the Viceroy had been the most useful of those. They had revealed that besides their worlds in the far galaxy, the Viceroy also had a presence in Galaxy Destiny 2. That presence was some kind of research station located a little over 2 days in FTL away from Novus Prime. Spira had recharged in a nearby star, after which she had set course for this location. The database had also revealed some very useful information. While the actual cure was not in database, a search of the database had yielded 3 folders full of research on ALS. That information had been transmitted to Freedom Prime, where it had been given to the medical team working on Exodus 2. And they were already making some major progress in their research. In return for this information, Spira had provided the people of Novus with all the data they had collected on Galaxy Destiny 1, including everything they knew about the Goa'uld Empire. They had also given them all they knew about the Nakai, the Goa'uld, and the Order of the Other. Together with the announcement that they could resettle their abandoned colonies, Nikita suspected that they had just changed things considerably for the people of Novus. Tilda, but we won't be around to see that. Tilda, and there were other things for him to worry about. The last thing they had gotten from the database was information about the rogue black hole that had destroyed the original Novus. Using the information, Nikita had calculated both the black hole's course and where it had begun its journey. What really worried him was the fact that the starting point of the Novus black hole was the same as the Viceroy research station. And after what they had been through so far, he refused to believe that it was a coincidence. So he set to hammering his hunch into an official report. 26. Getting back to work. H3X 107 Desert Year 2, Day 3, 0930. Lieutenant Vanessa James was the first person through the gate. The test dial to Freedom Prime had gone off without a hitch, so she was not surprised that the Stargate worked just fine. But she had been surprised when Colonel Young had told her that she would be leading a team to this planet. Chaser had launched with plenty of supplies, so they had not been sent here for food or water. It turned out that they were looking for intelligence instead. Besides James, there were 4 other people on the team. Ronald Greer and Corporal Reynolds were the muscle of the team, while Camille Ray was the closest thing they had to an ambassador, and Chloe Armstrong, having studied Daniel Jackson's work, was here to serve as team archaeologist. The intelligence the Valison and their allies had provided on the order of other had revealed that H3X-107 was one of the few worlds in this region that was habitual, but had not been settled. The Valison believed that this was because the Order used it to test their terraforming technology. Young figured that the Order would want to monitor the outcome of said experiments, and to do that, they would need an outpost on said planet. His suspicion had been confirmed by the Malpi. Because all of their Kinos had been left behind on Destiny, they had needed replacements. So the Primians had built 12 Malpis to fill the hole. The Malpi had also shown that the outpost was currently empty, which would make the mission a little easier, as would the fact that they had arrived in middle of the night. James readied her weapon and told her team to head out. Chaser Gate Room Year 2, Day 3, 0933. Dr. Dale Volker was manning the gate room. The team was headed for the Order outpost, while Volker was using the Malpi to take a closer look at the rest of the planet. He was moving the Malpi further away from the gate and running scans. While the gate and the outpost were located in the desert, the Stargate was not far from the edge of said desert. Beyond the edge, there was what appeared to be a grassland with some trees that looked a lot like palms. There was also a small lake in that area. The Malpi had just reached the grass when Colonel Young walked into the gate room. "How are things going on the planet?" "The team is heading towards the outpost. I'm moving the Malpi to an oversight position, but I'm taking the scenic route to gather some more information on the planet," Volker said. "What do you have so far?" "Plants," Volker worked the controls. "Lots and lots of plants." "Well, they have to start somewhere." Volker worked the controls, and the Malpi steered out of the grasslands again. He worked the Malpi to the top of the highest dune and pointed the unit in the direction of the outpost and dialed the zoom up to maximum. Young joined him at the console. The outpost was a small black dome, which the night vision of the Malpi revealed to be metallic. A single set of doors appeared to be the only entrance. Young wondered what kind of surprises were beyond those doors. H3X-107 Desert Year 2, Day 3, 0940. Camille Ray couldn't believe she was doing this. Sneaking through the desert in the middle of the night, wearing a military uniform and night vision goggles. Colonel Young had not liked the idea of them going to this planet unarmed, so she was also carrying a taser. Following Lieutenant James, they had reached the Order outpost. The place had a set of wooden doors at its entrance, but there was no sign of locks or a security system. James signaled to Greer and Reynolds, who took up position. She grabbed one of doors and yanked it open. "Clear," Greer yelled, before leading the entry into the building. The dome was one large space. There were several consoles and what appeared to be scientific equipment. James and Greer led the way, while Camille and Chloe covered the middle and Reynolds took up the rear. When they reached the consoles, James turned to Ray and Armstrong. "Do your thing." "Okay," Chloe said, while taking off a backpack full of equipment. "Let's see what we can find out." They began examining the outpost. Amongst the equipment were a Polaroid camera well, the Freedom Prime version of one, and a Geiger counter. While Chloe took photos, Camille swept the counter's detector over all the place. There was no sign of radiation anywhere. Well, that doesn't tell us much. After that was done, they activated one of the consoles. It was in an alien language that appeared to be a mix of Nakai, Ursini, and Zivalo. Chloe took out a notebook, which was full of notes on alien languages. As Chloe set to translating what the console was saying, Camille went to take a closer look at the rest of the dome. She found a switch, which was connected to several lights. After she flicked the switch, she took her goggles off. The lights were not enough to light the entire outpost, but it was enough for her to make do with a flashlight. That was when she spotted a hatch in the floor. "Lieutenant, you should see this." James joined her at the hatch. Like the front door, there were no signs of an alarm or a lock. She opened the hatch and stuck her weapon into the gap. There was a ladder underneath the hatch and circuits in the walls. Camille grabbed the Geiger counter and checked the radiation levels, which were safe. James went down the ladder first, while Camille grabbed several instruments and then followed. The ladder ended in a maintenance tunnel. As soon as they entered, several lights came on. "So, glad to be back in the field." "Yeah, living on Freedom Prime was not bad," James began. "The food was good, the people were nice, and it never rained, but I'm glad to be back to doing what I've been trained to do. What about you? How have you been spending your time?" "Besides dealing with Rush and his depression," Camille said with a smile, "there wasn't much for to do back home." She paused and swallowed. "Sharon has moved on. She got involved with a violinist from Toronto." "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," Camille said. "And I told her to stop waiting for me, so I don't blame her either." She paused. "Still, it took me some time get used to the idea." They reached the end of the corridor. It ended in a round chamber with several control consoles. The room reminded Camille of the control interface room aboard Destiny. Each of these consoles came with a stool. Camille sat down on one of the stools and activated one of the consoles. Oddly enough, this console was not in the same language as the ones above. Instead, this console was in Gynaco. Tilda Well, they were the engineers of the Goa'uld Empire. Tilda. She took out a translation unit. The problem with these units was that these translators had their limitations. They could translate Zivalo, English, Nakai, Gynaco, and Ursini. But if you started mixing languages, they tended to throw a fit, which was why Chloe was using the notebook instead. As she worked the translator and the console, her mind wandered to Sharon. Losing her had been very, very hard. So oddly enough, she had been actually grateful for Rush and his depression. It had given her a much-needed distraction. And there had been Tamara's ALS as well. The thought that her friend would be dying slowly, becoming trapped in her body, it made her stomach turn. Tilda, she's a good person, and what's going to happen to her stinks. Tilda, she knew that the Primians were doing their best, but there were no guarantees. And there was also losing Destiny. When she had arrived back in 2009, the ancient vessel had been last place she had wanted to be. But in the year before they had gone into stasis, the ship had become home, so part of her missed the old rust bucket. "Camille," James said, "are you okay?" It was then that she realized that she had been staring in the distance. She nodded and got back to studying the console. It appeared that the outpost was powered by a combination of advanced solar panel mounted on top of the dome and a geothermal converter below. She took a couple of photos of the display, and then the two of them headed back to the surface to see what Chloe had found. 27, approaching major trouble. Spira Mess Hall Year 2, Day 6, 11:30. The Viceroy Research Station was roughly 3 days in FTL away from Novus Prime. Vale had told Levine to modify their course and speed so that they would arrive at 1200 hours exactly. That way, they would be able to perform what the ancient database called a Level 3 scan of whatever was ahead. The scan would take an hour, which would leave them with 3 hours to analyze the results. Then a fresh shift would take Spira closer to the Viceroy Research Station, which they had codenamed Charlie. But before they arrived, Vale was doing his homework. So he was reading Aronov's report on the research station and the black hole. Tilda, Nikita is right. It's too neat to be a coincidence. Tilda, he had just finished it when Alec Carlson walked in. Carlson grabbed something to eat and then sat down across from him. "Doing some light reading." "Yes," Vale began. "Nikita's report on Charlie and the black hole," he handed the report to Carlson. "I know that you're an engineer, not an astrophysicist, but what's your opinion?" "Well, I agree that's it, too big a coincidence," Carlson said. "But Nikita is not that kind of scientist. There's no data to crunch the numbers. Once we have the scans," he took a bite from his sandwich. "Allison, Jennifer, and I should be able to get together and give you some answers." "Sounds like a plan," Vale said. "And make sure that all the telemetry makes it up the DSI network. I want the eggheads on Atlantis and Earth to pitch in as well. You got it, boss. I'm going to see how things are going on the bridge. Vale walked out of the bridge, while Carl Grogan walked into the mess hall. He collected a meal before sitting down where Vale had been. While he did so, Coulson had begun reading Nikita's report. He had read it when it had been added to the database, but he figured it couldn't hurt to dust off his knowledge. Nikita's report on Charlie. Yes, there's not much there, Coulson said. Rule 39, Grogan said, which made Coulson smile. It was well known aboard Spira that Grogan was an avid NCIS fan. There were also whispers that he had a crush on the character of Ellie Biscop. And there is something that keeps nagging at me. I've read the report on the Zivolo and their time travel device. And not once, is the word rogue in that report. What if the Zivolo created a standard issue black hole? That would be bad, really bad. Coulson finished his meal while he pondered the combination of Nikita's hunch and Grogan's suggestion. If both of them were right, there's something bad had either happened or was about to happen. Either way, he had some research to do, so he made his way out of the mess hall and got busy. Spira Science Lab Year 2, Day 6, 1503. Spira had dropped out of hyperspace on schedule, and the scan had gone off without a hitch. So Haley, Coulson, Aronov, and Porter had been sitting in the science lab looking at screens. Coulson was studying Charlie, while Aronov was translating all the station's comm traffic, and Haley and Porter were studying the starting point of the black hole, which turned out to be the site of an anomaly, and Charlie orbited that anomaly. As for what the anomaly was, that was the big mystery. The area was a bright light surrounded by what appeared to be simmering space. It was like hot air above a plane. At least, that's how it looked to Vale. What have we got? A lot of conflicting data, Porter said. Whatever this is, it is not very stable. So, Vale began, if it's that true, why hasn't it eaten Charlie? Over to you, Alec, Porter said. Charlie appears to be emitting some kind of anti-gravity field, Coulson began. She also has shields and high-power thrusters. The station is accompanied by what appears to be a transmitter satellite. The satellite is several thousand kilometers farther out, so I am thinking that our anomaly messes with subspace communications. Speaking of which... Right, that's my cue, Nikita began. I've translated all their comm traffic, and it appears to be telemetry on the anomaly. Based on what I've seen so far, these guys are preparing for some kind of experiment, but they are sending the data back to their homeworld for double-checking. The problem is that I have no idea what the experiment is. Okay, let's make that priority number 1, Vale said. Figure out the experiment, figure out the anomaly, figure out what to do next. He turned to Haley. I want Allison, Alec, and Nikita to work on that. Your job is to come with a plan B, draft whoever you need. You got it, boss, Haley said. Vale walked out of the science lab and left them to do their work. He hoped that figuring out the experiment would set them on course towards solving the puzzle in front of them, but he had been around long to plan it didn't always work. So he assigned Haley to come up with a plan B. Tilda always have backup plan. Tilda only time would tell if it worked. Spira Briefing Room Year 2, Day 6, 1530. Spira only had one science lab, so Haley had hijacked the briefing room, which was rarely used, and done some improvisation. She had drafted Sonara, Tizalo, and Xander Henderson to help her with Plan B. The 4 of them were studying the data they had on 2 laptops and a large screen mounted on the wall. And like Allison Porter had said, that data was largely contradictory, which wasn't really helping their efforts. You know I'm a technical sergeant, not a scientist, Henderson began. And don't you have a whole bunch of scientists on staff? We do, Haley said, but I need them to focus on their regular duties and Plan A. Besides, I've learned that scientists sometimes overlook the obvious. Having a non-scientist looking at the data saves you from that pitfall. Good point. There was a moment of silence as they all studied the information. Then, Tizalo suddenly had an idea. He hit several keys, and the image changed. It showed a star chart of the space between Charlie and Novus. Then he hit several more keys, and a red line appeared. But while the line ended at Novus, it did not begin at their current location. Tizalo hit several more keys, and a green dot appeared. It was marked Novus Prime and was below the red line. "It is not what is here that is key," Tizalo said. "The red line is the course of the rogue black hole, but I told the computer only to draw the line where it could confirm the presence by means of the destruction it left behind. But look at these 3 closest solar system." He put a yellow circle around them, which are on the course, and thus should have taken a major beating. But have 0 damage, Sonara said. "So, how does a rogue black hole skip 3 solar systems?" Henderson asked. "Whatever it was, it could be the cause of that anomaly," Haley said. "And," now she had an idea, "hyperspace, that's how it could skip 3 solar systems. What if the black hole somehow ended up in hyperspace and was launched somehow?" She hit some keys on one of the laptops. An image of the anomaly appeared. What if this is not an anomaly, but the scar tissue from some very powerful event? "Sounds like you are making progress," Vale said as he walked in. "Yes," Haley said, "we have a theory to work with, so I'm going down to the lab to compare notes." "Well, I just came from there," Vale began. "Apparently, the experiment they are planning is some kind of manipulation of the anomaly. They also learned from the communications logs that Charlie sent several probes into the heart of the thing. It showed them that there is a temporal element to the area. Also, whatever the experiment is, it is going to be executed in 3 days." Haley felt a theory forming inside her head. "Tilda, I just hope that I'm wrong. Tilda, because if even half of what she was suspecting was true, they would be in major trouble." She gave Vale a look which the colonel understood immediately and then stormed out of the room. Vale didn't ask what she was thinking, but simply followed her. "Tilda, she has a hunch, and if she's right, it will be bad, Tilda." Destiny Stasis Pods Corridor Year 2, Day 6, 1532. Jin woke up in a stasis pod. The unit opened and she stepped out. "Tilda, what happened?" Tilda, she looked at her hands, then flexed her fingers as she realized she was no longer inside Destiny's computer. "Tilda, no way." Tilda, she took a couple of steps as the reality of that sank in. Then she realized something. "Tilda, where is Dr. Perry?" Tilda, as if on cue, a second stasis pod opened and Amanda Perry stepped out. The look on her face was one of pure shock. And Jin couldn't blame her. A car accident had left Dr. Perry a quadriplegic at age 9. She had probably been dreaming off this every day since then, and now that dream had come true. She now had a working body again. Perry had a huge grin on her face. Then they noticed that there was a third stasis pod with somebody inside it. 28 paperwork and another planet. Chaser Science Lab Year 2, Day 3, 1409. Nicholas Rush was sitting behind a laptop and working on a report on the order of the other outpost. Camille and Chloe had brought back plenty of pictures and even some samples. Beyond that, the Malp had run every scan it could. But even with all that data to analyze, there was only so much he could say about the order and their technology. He had just finished the second page of his report when Colonel Young came in. Rush had been surprised that Young had sent Camille and Chloe on this mission. While they had skills, they were not scientists, so Rush would have sent Volker, Brody, or Park. Young stood next to Rush and studied his report. "I see your report on the outpost is coming along." "Yes," Rush said. "Yes, it is." "Let me guess, you would have sent somebody else on this mission," Young said. "Some of the scientists," Rush gave him a look. "They had the skills for the mission, and I talked to people they needed to go on this mission." "So, how are you going to decide where to send the next mission?" Aboard Destiny or Spira, there had been an artificial intelligence in the mix. The AI would analyze data from the siege ships and stargates and make recommendations to the crew. But Chaser did not have such a program. And the Order had only colonized about a third of the far galaxy, creating an area which the locals called civilized space. The problem was that once they were outside civilized space, there would be no intelligence for them to rely on. "I'm working on it," Young said. "Even at maximum speed, we still have 5 weeks before we reach the edge of civilized space." Chaser was officially called the Free Alliance Starship Chaser. It was no coincide that the name was shortened to FSD Chaser or Fast Chaser, because the Primians had given the ship a powerhouse of a hyperdrive. Not only was the ship faster than Destiny, even in intergalactic mode, the drive needed very little cooldown or maintenance. Rush and Ali had done the math and calculated that even in obsessed mode crossing civilized space would take Destiny 19 weeks. The math had also shown that Chaser 3.5 times faster than Destiny. And that, in the long run, catching up to the ancient vessel would not be a problem. Even if they made supply stops at planets, while Destiny did not, they would catch her in the end. The real problem was that there was a good chance that they would not be able to get on board. As long as the ship was in FTL, the Stargate would not be able to connect. And even if they got on board, Destiny would still be in obsessed mode, and they still had no way to override that, which would lead to all sorts of supply problems. Although he would never say it out loud, Rush knew all this. And he also knew that the supply issues were exactly why Colonel Telford and his team had evacuated the ship to begin with. The best Chaser would be able to do was to shadow Destiny as close as she could and try to wait out obsessed mode. Alas, because the Viceroy had kept the ship in place for 5 years, that would probably be a long wait. And Chaser would probably not be alone, because the Nakai Central Authority had dispatched a new fleet just before the Viceroy had unleashed the Berserker drones against them. The deep space internet relays had noticed them, and both the Delta Site and Atlantis had filed reports on this. And it was only a matter of time before that fleet showed up. To make a long story short, the Destiny expedition was not going to have an easy ride, which both Rush and Young knew. The two of them exchanged a look, and then Young walked out of the room. Rush sighed and then got back to writing his report. H4S 125 Cave Year 2, Day 17, 1903. The Stargate on H4S 125 was in a cave that was about 100 meters underneath the surface. In fact, the team had not found any route to the surface at all. The Malp had told them that the place was a series of tunnels and caves. Some were natural, but there were also sections that had clearly been added by machinery. The intelligence files had indicated that this planet did not have an atmosphere and had not been provided with a gate by the siege ships. But the Order had moved the Stargate there so that they could mine the planet for certain ores that they needed to make construction materials. Then, 7 years ago, the ores had run out, so the Order had abandoned the mine. Young and Rush had agreed that the planet was a good place to visit. Not only was it a potential source of information on the Order and their technology, there was a good chance that they would be able to find some limestone for their supplies. Chaser had left with fully stocked CO2 scrubbers, but they figured it couldn't hurt to have an emergency supply. The readings from the Malp also suggested that it was a good source of water. The team consisted of 6 people. Because they both wanted to see Order technology for themselves, Young and Rush were on the team. And because they had been to the Order outpost, Vanessa James and Chloe Armstrong were also here. But just in case something went wrong, and because they didn't want to risk losing everybody who had been to H3X 107, Camille Ray and Ronald Greer had stayed behind on the ship. Completing the team were Dale Volker and Lieutenant Matthew Scott. As soon as they stepped through the gate, they turned on their flashlights. Beyond their own lights, the place was pitch black, but the lights revealed a thick cable of some kind. Rush, Scott, and Volker went left, while Young, Chloe, and James went to the right. Young's side of the cable ended at a big, bulky machine of some sort. This machine was connected to a large standing console. Both the machines and the console were covered in a layer of dust and plenty of cobwebs. Chloe approached the console and began pushing buttons. "What have we got?" Young asked. "It looks like an emergency generator," Chloe said. "One that is bolted to the floor," James said, before trying to shake the machine, but to no avail. "And it's pretty sturdy." She walked around the machine, studying the floor. There were signs that somebody had tried to remove the pins and failed, which it seems they did try to remove. "Looks like they overdid securing the generator," Young said. "Explains why they left the machine behind. Can you get it going?" Chloe worked the console. The generator actually consisted of 3 subunits. There was not enough fuel left to engage all 3 units, but she managed to pump all the remaining fuel into one unit and engage that one. It took a moment, but she managed to bring it up to 45%. "I have partial power, and we'll probably only have a few minutes before the fuel runs out." "Let's go see what's on the other end," Young said. At the other end of the cable, Rush and his half of the team had found a machine of some kind as well. It was a large cylinder on legs that were wide apart and ended at the cave walls. Underneath, the cylinder was an upside-down pyramid made out of crystal. Walking around the machine revealed a ladder that ended at a chair with console in front of it. Volker climbed the ladder and set to working the controls. Much to his surprise, the device actually engaged when he pressed the proper buttons. It was at that point that Young and company joined them. "We found an emergency generator that Chloe got running," Young said. "But there's not a lot of fuel, so work fast." "I'd like to take a look at that generator," Rush said. "I can show you the basics," Chloe said. "Scott, go with them," Young said. "Yes, sir," Scott said. Rush, Scott, and Chloe left for the emergency generator, while Volker set to operating the machine. The crystal pyramid slowly began to glow as he increased the power. Then a particle beam jumped from the tip and hit the ground. The ground vaporized as soon as the beam touched it, meaning that the device was some kind drill. Volker took pictures of all the displays and controls, then powered down the drill. That done, he climbed down from the machine. "Am I the only one who thinks that is too easy?" James asked. "The Order thinks that they are the only ones who hand out gate remotes," Young said. "They think that nobody can use the Stargates except the people they approve for gate travel." The Valison had provided them with that little piece of knowledge as well. They had also owned 7 gate remotes, so after some heated debate, they had given one of them to the Epsilon site, where the Primians had been studying the device in detail. As soon as the new Assurans had arrived, they had joined said study, which had provided some very useful information. "So," Volker began, "not only are they playing the role of the ancients, they have gotten the hubris down as well." "Yeah, pretty much." The rest of team returned, and Colonel Young led them deeper into the network. Nobody had noticed a row metal balls each about the size of a golf ball that was mounted on the cave wall behind the Stargate. They had begun recording as soon as the team had come through the gate. The devices waiting until the team walked out range, then tiny greens lights came on as they transferred their footage to a small metal cylinder with an antennae on top. 2 seconds later, the unit began transmitting. "Order Homeworld Security Room 2 Year 2, Day 17, 1915. Brother Xander was a Gynaco. A currently very bored Gynaco. He had been the unlucky soul to get drafted to Man Security Room 2 at the planetary doorway base, which was typical for his luck. Security Room 1, which took care of planet-side security, occasionally had something to do. Usually these were small incidents, lab accidents, drunken brothers or sisters getting into a fight, maybe an escaped pet or two, but at least it was something. Security Room 2, however, was responsible for off-world security, and nothing happened here. Ever. so he was soundly asleep when the alarm began to bleep. He sat up and began working the only control console in the room. "Tilda, you have got to be kidding me." Tilda, he frowned when he saw the source of the problem. Tilda Mine 4. Tilda Mine 4 had been abandoned 30 years ago, so the alarm made no sense. Tilda, but it's still coming in. Tilda, but before moving it up the chain of command, he wanted to make sure that this was not some kind of hoax. So he opened a channel to Security Room 1 and began explaining what was going on. 29, a miracle and a disaster. Destiny Gate Room Year 2, Day 6, 1725. Jin and Perry had searched all the rooms they could access. All the control consoles they could get to were dead, and they were the only people aboard. There were also some kind of uniforms all over the place, but none of them were Icarus base uniforms or Lucian Alliance garb. Instead, they were an alien uniform of some kind, and the man in the third stasis pod was wearing that uniform. At the moment, however, the two of them were not in the corridor with stasis pods. Jin and Perry had had disagreements in the past, but those were behind them now. They needed to work together and they needed to plot their next move. After searching the ship, they had precious little supplies. Tilda one day, maybe two, Tilda Jin thought as she walked into the gate room. And without working controls, they couldn't dial the Stargate. But even if they had working controls, there was the issue of Destiny being in FTL. Tilda, and that means no Stargate travel. Tilda. "How are things looking in hydroponics?" Perry asked. "The main dome is filled with nothing but dead plants," Jin said, "and I can't get the original bay open. We need more supplies and we need answers. The problem is that we can get the answers by waking up the man in the third pod, but that would be a drain on our supplies." Perry paused. "We need a miracle." Before Jin could say anything, a small circle of green light formed on the floor between the control consoles where they were and the Stargate. The light rose up into a cylinder and then coalesced into a solid object. Jin picked it up. It was a can with a label in English. The label said "One miracle as requested." She sniffed the can. "Smells like oil." "Okay, you tell me you can't open the hydroponics bay, and suddenly, a can of oil appears out nowhere." "I know," Jin said. "It even comes with an injector." "There was an injector attached to the can, but I'm not complaining." Perry nodded, and the two of them headed for original hydroponics bay. When they got there, Jin used the can on the door, then she hit the button for the doors. The last time, the doors had refused to budge, but this time the doors opened. As they stepped inside, Jin realized why the doors hadn't opened. The plants in the bay had grown like crazy, overgrowing everything, including the doors. The oil had lubricated the doors and dissolved the plants. It would take time to clean up the place, but something told her that their food problem had gone away for the considerable future, which meant that their only remaining problem was the man in the stasis pod. Spira Science Lab Year 2, Day 6, 1733. Jennifer Haley was very unhappy because her theory had turned out to be correct. They had checked and double-checked, but the data kept saying that they were right. "Tilda, this is going to be ugly." Tilda, taking a deep breath, she opened her laptop and then looked at Vale. After she had stormed out, she had begun brainstorming with the people in the science lab. When Vale had seen what they had been doing, he had left them to it. Instead of breathing down their necks, he had used the ancient stones to report back to Earth. And when she had called him in for her report, he had used the stones to get General O'Neill and Colonel Samantha Carter on board. O'Neill was in Major Levine, and Carter had swapped with Allison Porter. As soon as they had arrived, she had opened her laptop. "Okay," Vale began. "What do you have?" "It's bad, sir," Haley said. "I think we have a paradox here, because Grogan was right." "Grogan?" O'Neill asked. "I got shot during training, that Grogan." "Yes, sir," Haley began. Now the Zivalo traveled back and created a black hole, but it was a regular black hole. She turned the laptop around so that Carter could see the data. Carter sat down and began going over it. It wasn't going anywhere. She's right, sir. That's why there were conflicting readings. Part of the readings are on the black hole, while the rest are the anomaly. But the black hole isn't here anymore, Vale began. It hasn't been here for. He paused. Oh, a rift in the space-time continuum, that's how they are getting readings on the black hole. Yes, sir, Haley said. And it gets worse because we figured out the experiment. We wrecked their coup d'etat plan for Novus. This is their plan B. They are going to try to dissolve the black hole with an anti-gravity beam. If they succeed, there will be no rogue black hole to destroy Novus. It would completely rewrite their timeline. New timeline, new chance to take over the planet. But, O'Neill said. I checked their numbers, Haley said. It's not going to work. They're the reason the black hole went rogue. That's the paradox. They are going to cause the very event they are trying to prevent. That's why the black hole skipped 3 solar systems. The launch was so violent that it skipped a chunk of normal space. Can't we warn them? O'Neill asked. No, sir, Carter asked. That would alter the timeline, and we have no idea what the consequences would be if we do so, sir. We could end up deleting or killing millions of people. We don't have the right to go messing with the timeline, sir. And we tried to communicate with Charlie, Vale said. They are refusing to take our calls, so ignoring the ethical issues, we simply can't do it. In fact, we need to get out of here, Haley began. Because when this happens, it's going to be bad. It's not only going to destroy Charlie, the effects will probably ripple light years away from the point or origin. If we're still here when that happens, this ship will get crushed like a tin can, General. Okay, Colonel, O'Neill said. Take Spira into FTL. All gate activity is to be suspended. You need to put as much distance as you can between you and here as you can before the Big Bang. Yes, sir. Vale left the science lab, while Carter and Haley started discussing the telemetry in detail. Not a fan of technobabble, O'Neill left the room as well. He was halfway to the bridge when the ship jumped into FTL, and he was back in the briefing room at Stargate Command for a second. Once that moment was over, O'Neill continued to the bridge. When he got there, Vale was in the command chair. For the record, O'Neill began, Carter is right about this whole timeline thing. The ancients got into all sorts of trouble by trying to play God. I know, Vale said. But that doesn't change the fact that it stinks, because the vicegerent might be assholes, but they are still people. There's that. O'Neill sighed as he realized that Vale was right, and they were partially responsible for this situation. After all, it was Spira that had sabotaged their plan A, and it had been right thing to do. But that was not making him feel better now. Spira Bridge Year 2, Day 9, 11:57. They had 3 minutes before the experiment began. The eggheads back on Earth had confirmed that the vicegerent plan wouldn't work. They had severely underestimated the gravity field of the black hole. But more important, they had not properly compensated for its temporal distortion. And the experiment, which Vale had named Operation Backlash, was scheduled for 1200 hours today. As for Spira, she had done exactly what General O'Neill had ordered. They had put as much distance between themselves and Charlie as they could. Levine and Tizalo were doing the flying, while Haley and Porter were on the science consoles, and Coulson was on the engineering console behind the command chair. Vale was in said command chair, with Grogan manning the weapons. Tilda just in case. Tilda, all of the non-essential system had been turned off, so that the power could be diverted to the shields. How are we looking, Alec? Shields are at maximum, and we're moving as at full speed. Major, Doctor, what do we have on sensors? Nothing so far, Haley said. Same here, Porter added. Vale leaned back and watched as the clock ticked away the time to Operation Backlash. Then the display clock turned red and continued counting time in negative numbers. It reached -7 minutes and 12 seconds before the science consoles began beeping with all sorts of alarms. Colonel, Haley said. "We are reading a major distortion wave. It looks like a major ripple in space." "Can we outrun it?" "No," Levine said. "We have 6 minutes and 7 seconds until it hits, sir." Vale activated the intercom and told everybody to brace for impact. As the ripple approached them, the space behind them slowly began to light up. Finally, there was a wall of blinding light as far as the eye and the sensors could see. And 13 minutes and 19 seconds after Operation Backlash began, that light swallowed Spira whole. 30 into the unknown. Chaser Gate Room Year 2, Day 38, 0918. They had reached the border of civilized space. It turned out that said border was not actually a hard border. Instead, there was the official border and then a transition zone. The transition zone was not colonized by the Order of Other yet, but the local gate-capable planets had established frontier towns, farms, and infrastructure. And basically, it was the Wild West of the far galaxy. That meant shootouts between outlaws and law and order were still very common. In fact, Lieutenant Matthew Scott had just gotten in a firefight to back up the local constabulary on H5R 821. The planet didn't have much to offer, but there was a sheep-like species that could be found in extremely large numbers on the world. Scott's team had not only won the firefight, but had also come back with a large stockpile of meat and clothing. The natives had even thrown in some ammo for their trouble. Scott was reporting all this to Colonel Young when Chaser jumped back into hyperspace. Young had been up for way too long, so he headed for his quarters and ordered Scott to go take charge on the bridge. When he walked onto the bridge, all 3 stations were manned. Illy Wallace was behind the right console, Corporal Barnes was in the middle, and Sergeant Hari Paviso was at the left console. Paviso was a Nakai and a top-notch pilot. He was one of the new crew members that had joined them from Freedom Prime. "So, Matt, rumor has it that you picked up some new threads for us on 821. Illy said. "Indeed I did. They even had some colors," Scott said. The colors were limited to red, brown, green, purple, and yellow, but he was not complaining. "I'll take what I can get, Tilda." "Nice," Illy said with a smile. While they had been on Freedom Prime, the locals had repaired the clothes they had wearing when they had been thawed. They had also been given new clothes, with the Senate paying the bill. The civilians had each been given 4 new outfits. While the military personnel had each gotten 2 new uniforms, the locals had managed to make perfect copies and 2 civilian outfits. Scott also figured that they had enough clothes from 821 to give everybody 1 more outfit. As for the new crew members, the Jinako could wear the same clothes as the humans, while both the Ursini and Nakai wore costume-made uniforms and civilian clothes. Like the new uniforms, they were perfect copies. They were just special sizes to fit the non-humanoids. Scott gave Illy a nod and then sat down in the command chair. "So, what do we have on sensors?" "Nothing special so far, sir," Corporal Barnes said. "We have roughly 3 hours before we hit uncharted space, Lieutenant," Paviso said. "According to the locals, 821 is the last settlement. We'll pass H5R 823, which is the unofficial border of the transition zone. It's been visited by colonists as a source for certain medications. But it's a desert planet, so it's too harsh for permanent habitation. Medications. There's a creature that sounds like what on Earth is called a scorpion. If you extract their toxins and process them the right way, you can make several antibiotics." "Illy, make a note of that," Scott said. "If we drop out in range, we might want a scorpion hunting." "Right." Illy nodded and set to making the note. As a result, he did not notice a red dot that appeared at the very edge of sensor range. It was only within range for a second before it vanished again. Illy finished making the note and went back to monitoring the sensors. Order Warship Yalak Bridge Year 2, Day 40, 1705. Commander Rayo Gazel was sitting in the command chair of the Yalak. The main viewer was showing the vessel they were trailing. So far, the target appeared to be totally unaware that they were being followed. Tilda so far, so good. Tilda Yalok was one of 2 warships the Order of Other had. She was assigned to deal with external threats. The other warship, which was called Grand Founders, was assigned to defend the Order homeworld. It had been the people on the homeworld who had labeled the ship they were following as a threat. Tilda, after what happened on Mine 4, it makes sense. Tilda now, it was only a matter of time of picking the right moment to strike. Chaser Bridge Year 2, Day 50, 0800. Matthew Scott dropped the chaser about hyperspace. This was the 3rd time since they had left civilized space that they were taking a stab at gathering supplies. So far, they had not had much luck finding food and water. They had, however, hit upon a big stash off Limestone on their 2nd trip. Next to him, Ronald Greer was manning the weapons. 4 Stargates in range, sir, Scott said. What does our new toy say? H5X018, Scott began. It should have water. Chaser still didn't have artificial intelligence, but Ali, Rush, Park, and Volker had been hard at work programming several advanced filters. They were programmed to find and highlight a selected list of elements when they were detected by the long-range sensors. It wasn't perfect, but if they worked, these programs might increase their chances. The problem was that this was the first time they were using the filters, so the plan was still untested. Time to test the filter, Young said, before turning to Greer. Assemble a team. Yes, sir, Greer said, before turning to the 3rd person manning the bridge, which was Varro. You up for a trip? Always, Varro said. Varro and Greer left the bridge, while Young grabbed his radio. Several minutes later, Camille and Ali walked into the room. Before they had gone into stasis, Ray had never manned one of the bridge console. Which had made sense, because she was the IOA representative and the human resources officer for both Icarus Base and Destiny. But Young had decided that he wanted all of the crew, old and new on the Chaser, to be rated on the bridge consoles. It was an approach developed by the U.S. Navy for their submarines. The idea was that everybody had to be able to do every job. Ray gave Young a look before sitting down at one of the consoles. She had barely done so when her console beeped. A ship just entered sensor range, Camille said. Do you have an ID? She worked the console, and a profile appeared on one of the screens. It was not good news. Order Warship Yalok Bridge Year 2, Day 50, 0807. The time had come. Yalok was about to attack her target. Goa'uld stood up from his command chair and looked at the main viewer. He had begun his career in Order Naval Forces as a pilot, so he would have preferred to be behind the helm at this very moment. But that was not his seat anymore. Instead, that place was held by Lieutenant Vijar, a very capable Nakai pilot. As for him, Goa'uld was a Gynako-Zivalo hybrid who was no fan of the center seat, but somebody had to make the hard calls. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Vijar. Maintain course and speed, Lieutenant. Yes, Commander, Vijar said. Major Karos, Sound Action Stations, Goa'uld began. All hands prepare to attack. Major Karos was the Ursini executive officer of the Yalok. He was also the ship's weapons officer and the best shot they had aboard. There was a pause, and then the alarms began to sound. Goa'uld made his way to the helm and hit the proper keys to silence the klaxon. Then he sat down in the command chair again. The battle was about to begin. Chaser Bridge Year 2, Day 50, 0809. Chaser scored 2 hits on the attacking ship, while dodging 2 shots herself. The Primians had not wanted to take any risks, so Chaser was fitted with the heaviest and most advanced weapons they had been able to get their hands on. She was equipped with 16 cannons and 2 missile tubes. As for their enemy, it was a Goa'uld Haddock-class vessel. But for some reason, it had not launched its death gliders. Not that Young-minded. He watched as Scott threw the ship through another turn and only managed to score 3 more hits. Camille then launched 2 missiles at the attacker, both of which were fitted with technology that allowed them to get right through the enemy shields. The missiles hit the Goa'uld ship, and its shields came down 30%. "Nice shooting," Young said. "Coming around again," Scott said. "Cannons moving," Illy began. "Firing again." Illy fired again, hitting the Goa'uld 3 times. The enemy fired back, but Scott dodged the shots. It was at this point that another ship appeared on sensors. Camille tried to ID the newcomer, but it was not in the database. What was clear, however, was that the alien vessel was a warship. It opened fire on the Goa'uld ship with all of its forward weapons. The Goa'uld ship's shields collapsed, and the vessel exploded. Then the newcomer turned around and jumped back into hyperspace. Order Warship Yaluk Bridge Year 2, Day 50, 0815. Goa'uld wished he could have contacted Chaser. But his orders were clear. He was to protect the Chaser, not contact it. The Goa'uld had placed surveillance devices on Mine 4, which the Order had discovered when they had intercepted the signal from those devices, which had triggered the alarm in Security Room 2. After Brother Xander had run this alert up the chain of command, Goa'uld's superiors had given all Order naval force ships orders to be on the lookout for suspicious Goa'uld activity. And when one of their ships had been detected following Chaser, Yaluk had been ordered to follow them. But the Goa'uld had been smart about their plan. They had waited until Chaser had left both civilized space and the transition zone behind. And then they had waited for their prey to be out of subspace transceiver range of the world they called H5R 821. It had been only then that they had attacked the ship and had paid the price. He left Major Karos in charge as he headed for his office. As soon as they reached transmission range, he would report the outcome to his superiors. But for now, he had paperwork to deal with. Chaser Bridge Year 2, Day 50, 0816. Young was glad that the Goa'uld had lost the fight, but plenty of things were not adding up. So he had assigned Rush and Brody to studying the data on the ship that had come to the rescue. He was also pondering why the Goa'uld had attacked them with just one ship. Tilda, and where were their death gliders? Tilda. He left Scott in charge on the bridge and headed for auxiliary control, where Rush and Brody were working on the information on the alien vessel. While he started to discuss their findings, Dr. Lisa Park, who had been manning another console because they had gone to battle stations, left the room for her quarters. "Tilda, I need some downtime. Tilda." As soon as she walked in, she realized that something was wrong. The entrance from the corridor led into her bedroom, where the lights were off. Then the automatic doors closed behind her and the lights came on. What she saw made her gasp. "Greetings, Dr. Park," Pelops, Supreme System Lord of the new Goa'uld Empire, said. "We've been waiting for you." Pelops was not alone. He was accompanied by 3 Jaffa, all of whom were not wearing the traditional Jaffa armor. Instead, they were wearing black coveralls, and they were all pointing Zatnikadals at her. "How did you get on board?" "Well, Anubis might have been a psychopathic, sociopathic, and utterly crazy monster," Pelops began. "But he did acquire some useful technology, including Asgard teleporters. We added one to a cargo ship, which also came with a cloaking device. So me and friends launched our little ship from the Vengeance before she proceeded to attack and teleport it over while the shields were still down." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know all about the 9th chevrons and the signal Destiny was built to decipher," Pelops said. "And he took out a small backpack. That backpack contained a cylinder filled with a blue liquid, and inside that liquid was a Goa'uld parasite. Need a spy aboard this ship. So we picked a set of quarters at random to teleport into, and you became the lucky winner." Pelops nodded to one of the Jaffa. The man fired his Zat, and the world went black. As Pelops watched, the Jaffa put Park on her bed. They put her on her belly, while Pelops opened the cylinder. He grabbed the parasite from the cylinder and dropped it on her back. Then he took out a knife and cut a hole in her shirt. 2 seconds later, Park screamed as the parasite burrowed its way into her body.